You're listening to Storytime in Paris on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content and to join our book club, please join us on Patreon. Since well before Victor Hugo looked up at Notre Dame and thought, what if a hunchback lived in there? Authors have been inspired by Paris. Welcome to the Storytime in Paris podcast on Paris Underground Radio, where we keep that tradition alive by showcasing an author with a French connection in each episode. Every episode will feature 5 questions asked by you, our author's biggest fans, and answered live on air. Then our authors will treat us to a reading of an excerpt from their book. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity. Would you like to join the Storytime in Paris book club? Head on over to patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio and stay tuned to the end of this episode for more information. My guest this week is Jaclyn Goldis, a former lawyer who gave it all up to travel the world and write a novel. Her latest book, The Chateau, published by Simon & Schuster, is a mystery thriller set in a chateau in Provence. What begins as a celebratory reunion for a group of old friends soon devolves into a, quote, deadly nightmare of secrets and murder, end quote. The Chateau is a deeply atmospheric and twisty page-turner that kept me happily guessing until the very last page. Please allow me to introduce Jaclyn Goldis, author of The Chateau. Hello, Jaclyn. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Jennifer. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm an author. My latest book just came out called The Chateau. It's a mystery thriller. And I'm originally a lawyer. I was a lawyer at a big firm in Chicago for over 7 years. And the year I was going to go up for partnership, I left my job to travel the world and write novels. And now we're 7 some years later, and that's what I'm doing.
That's amazing. It sounds like living a dream, like a different kind of dream, but a really fabulous dream.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it does feel like that a lot. Obviously, ups and downs, but yeah, I really enjoy the life I'm leading now.
And have you spent a lot of time traveling the world?
I did. So I backpacked the world in a carry-on backpack for a year plus. And wow, it was such an amazing experience. I got to see so many incredible places. And it was also, I didn't expect a really nice entree to minimalism. It was so nice to be forced to pack up everything and live out of only what could fit on my back. It was, yeah.
That's really funny. I just went traveling for about 3 weeks. And I thought I had packed quite minimally, and I didn't add anything to my bag. But by the end of those 3 weeks, I swear that the bag had gained 50 pounds. I don't know how it happened.
I felt the same way when I was backpacking, for sure. You become like a bag lady. It's like, I do just have a bag on my back, but then I have a little tote here and a little bit.
I don't know how it multiplied, but it did.
Totally.
So do you personally have a connection to Paris or to France?
No, I wouldn't say I have a connection. I mean, I've been a bunch of times. I've been to Paris. I've been to Provence. I love it there. But no, I didn't grow up with anyone like a French parent, and I don't speak French. So not a connection in that way.
Interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about what the Chateau is about?
Yeah. So the book is set in Provence, where the lady of the Chateau, Seraphine, has invited her granddaughter Darcy and 3 friends. And 20 years ago, the 4 girlfriends studied abroad together in Provence, and they would visit Seraphine on the weekends, cementing their bond. But why this sudden invitation? So the friends reunite at the Chateau, but before Seraphine can explain why she's summoned them, she's found brutally murdered. And secrets and deceptions begin to unravel. And as the murderer stalks the friends begin to suspect each other.
Very well put. Very succinct. There's so many twists and turns. It's kind of hard to be so concise, I think, but you did a great job.
Oh, thank you.
I read in your acknowledgments that you took a trip to Provence with your parents, and that sort of inspired the book.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that doesn't mean that there was like a haunted chateau or something.
No, the murder is all for my imagination.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I went to Saint-Remy and to Provence like 10 years ago. I fell in love with the town. I thought at the time, wow, this would be such a great setting for a book. And so that was part of the inspiration. The other part is my dad is a Soviet immigrant to America, and my grandmother escaped the Nazis when she was on the last train out of her small town in Ukraine. And some of her family members weren't so lucky, and they were murdered in mass graves. So I've always thought about the inheritance of trauma and the Holocaust and that kind of thing. And I think that there are so many books that talk about what it was like to be in that time period and during World War II and the Holocaust, but not so many that talk about the long shadow of the Holocaust in modern times. And when I was thinking about writing a murder mystery, I kind of thought about how the evils perpetrated during the Holocaust would be such an interesting motive for a modern day murder mystery. And you're probably wondering, how do I get from Ukraine to Provence? But the reason is I definitely didn't want to set a book in Ukraine. It was not the atmospheric place I was looking for this type of book. And when I was thinking about places that had unique World War II history that I didn't feel like had been, overly explored, I thought about Provence. And I also remembered the Van Gogh connection with Provence, which ended up kind of factoring into some of my storylines. So that's sort of how Provence came into the mix, kind of both all of that together.
That's so interesting. I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about the historical side, because we don't learn so much about the history of the place and the people and how it affects things until we get a little bit deeper into the book. So I was wondering if that is where the inspiration started, or whether it was something that sort of grew out of the process.
Yeah, I think it was really all together. All these threads were kind of in my mind as I was really thinking about where I wanted to set the book and what I wanted the story to be. And yeah, it kind of grew together.
So interesting. So if I'm not mistaken, this is your first foray into the sort of mystery thriller genre?
Yes.
So you do an excellent job. This book, I did not want to put it down.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. Thank you.
No, really. And it's very twisty and turny. Did you have any reservations about jumping into this sort of psychological thriller mystery world?
100%. Oh my gosh. I of course, love Agatha Christie, like every other thriller reader. And I love the twists and turns of a murder mystery. And that felt intimidating. It felt like, am I going to be able to pull this off? Because these books they're tricky, they're complicated, and that's what I love about them. But obviously it's different being a writer of them than a reader of them. And so, but it felt like a really fun challenge. Okay, let me see if I can do this.
And so now, being on the other side of it, do you think this is a genre you would go back to?
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm writing in it more. And
okay, well, as a reader, that makes me quite happy to hear. So good.
Yeah, I feel it's funny how things happen, because I didn't expect it, but really it's the only kind of book I want to write now. So
amazing. So we learn about Seraphine's murder pretty early on in the book. And then we kind of go back in time, and then we creep towards this whodunit of it all. Did you ever toy with the idea of revealing the murder later, or a different sort of structure for this reveal?
Yeah, I love that question. I think I did, because, spoiling who's murdered at the beginning could eliminate some of the mystery or tension as a reader is going through it. Because, if I hadn't said that she was the one murdered, that would be an added question in the reader's mind of if there's a murder, but you don't know who. But I really felt like there were so many mysteries in the book that I could have it be known that she's the one who dies at the beginning. And then I like that the reader goes into it, if they've read the back cover copy, knowing that she's the one who's murdered, then they have that in their head from the beginning. And so when she has her point of view chapters, and they're kind of already wondering what she's saying between the lines, kind of. So I felt that worked, but I could see it going a different way. And as I have been writing murder mysteries since I wrote the Chateau, it's a question I always think about. Yeah. When should the murder happen? And should I be saying the identity of who's murdered from the get-go?
It's so interesting to hear your thought process behind it all, because my first thought when the murder happened was oh, well, now I know who's dead. But you do such a great job of keeping the tension up. And then you have this whole like middle bit where you're like the characters all have their secrets and they're not sharing their secrets. And in the back of my head, I'm like, say it now. The murder's coming at some point. You have to say it.
Oh, I love that. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, sure. I think just in general in life, I mean, this doesn't add to the drama of books or TV or film or anything, but I think so many problems could be solved if people just say things right away.
Yes. But as writers, that's a hard balance. We want our characters to keep their secrets going until it's tactically, right for them to reveal them.
Yes, unfortunately, you're absolutely right. So there are really 4 main characters in this book, the 4 central women who were in the area when they were in their 20s and now they're back in their 40s, I believe.
Yeah.
And the book is told from their different perspectives and different chapters. When you were writing this, did you write like one perspective at a time, or did you bounce back and forth in the way that we end up reading it?
Pretty much it's the way you read it. I went pretty chronologically. I don't know. I know some authors kind of bounce around. For me, that's not really my way. I don't know. I need some order in the process, and I guess that's part of my order. Sometimes, like when I'm getting towards the end of a book, if like that's when I think the book starts like speaking to me more even and channeling through me a little bit more. And so sometimes like I'll jump forward a couple scenes if it's really itching to come out. But no, I think I mostly went chronologically.
Okay, interesting. And so each of these women is very different. They have different circumstances and mindsets and all of that. Did you have any tips or tricks to get into each woman's different mindset?
I found that difficult. It was probably one of the more difficult parts of the process because they're all the same age and the same gender, which doesn't always happen in a book and an ensemble cast. I really wanted to differentiate them. And so I really tried to pay extra attention to that, especially in edits. I would say like the biggest edits I did after writing were differentiating the women. In terms of getting into their mindset, I feel like it was clear to me from the beginning because I'm a plotter, not a pantser. So I really understood who all of them were and what their secrets were and the arc I wanted them all to go on. So I guess my tip more is just that I worked it out before. I really sat with them and kind of tried to feel who each of them was before I started writing, because I know some authors are pantsers and I totally tip my hat off to them. I don't understand how they do that. To me, it sounds so intimidating to stare at a blank page and have to just write as the character without knowing her yet. So I do the work kind of up front, I think.
And do you do like a character profile for each woman?
No, I don't do that. But I do sometimes play with things that feel fun for me. Like I'm into astrology. So sometimes I'll think about which astrological sign my character would be. Or sometimes, actually, I didn't do this. I don't remember if I did it for the Chateau, but I know I've done it for a book before where I look up Enneagrams and I give a character an Enneagram. I think there's no rhyme or reason. To me, a character map doesn't sound as fun, but doing it that way sounds more fun. So I don't know. I usually just go for what feels more exciting and fun to me.
I get that. And if you're really into astrology or Enneagrams, it's sort of a shorthand for all of that profile stuff anyway.
Totally.
So being a plotter, there are a lot of secrets in this book, and each woman certainly has like a main secret, at least one thing that she's hiding. Oftentimes there are many secrets. Did you know all of the secrets before you started, or were there ones that surprised you along the way?
I knew everything before I started. There's only one thing that I didn't, and I won't obviously give spoilers, but I knew the end, but I didn't know the last chapter.
Oh.
So I wrote the entire book, like up to the second to last chapter, like including the second to last chapter that's in the book. And then I knew it wasn't finished. I was like, but what comes after? I just couldn't figure it out. So that took me a bit. That was probably next to like differentiating the female characters. That was like the hardest part for me. And so once I figured out that secret, and I was like, oh yes, now I got it. So, but everything else I did know going into it. I mean, after I'd plotted.
If you're enjoying this podcast, you may also enjoy my podcast, City of Muses, which is brand new to the Paris Underground Radio Network. Each week, I chat with contemporary artists, poets, dancers, designers, and performers to explore what inspires them, where their creativity comes from, and how Paris has helped or hindered their dreams come true. Inspiration and creativity meet in Paris, the City of Muses. Check out City of Muses now, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. So the chateau in this book it's the main location for the story, and it's really present. It's very well described. I have no difficulty picturing it all. It's this big looming presence in the book, and it's sort of like the fifth main character in a way.
Yeah, I love that.
How did you craft this chateau, and was it based on something that you knew, or did you make it up?
So I've actually never been to a chateau, which is funny.
Wow.
I know. I wrote this during kind of the end of the pandemic lockdown. So no one was really traveling much at the time. But I feel so fortunate to be writing in an age where we have YouTube and we have Instagram. And I would never have set a book in Provence, I should say, not having been there. Like, I had to have been there and to have gone to Saint Remy to be able to write this book, in my opinion. But I felt like, okay, I haven't been to a chateau, but I can figure that part out. So actually, I won't say the name because I'm going to butcher it. But there's this chateau on Instagram that I just fell in love with. I don't even remember how I found it, but it was my inspiration for the one in the book. And I was just studying all their photos, and I was looking at anything I could find it from Google Images. And like on YouTube, some people posted video tours of it. So I really feel like I got a good gist of what the chateau was like. And then I gave it my own twist. Like, the artwork is my own thing, but I kind of imagined what this wealthy, French matriarch would have collected. And yeah, I watched a bunch of YouTube tours of chateaus so I could get more flavor. So that's how I did it.
Amazing. Well, now you have to come and visit some French chateaus.
I definitely do.
I guess it'll sort of ruin the mystery and mystique that you have in your mind. Maybe you should visit the chateau that you crafted it on.
I know. It's a dream. I would really love to go there.
Is that chateau, is it in France?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I need to go.
So the relationships between the women themselves, the friends themselves, are really interesting. So we have these four women who are in their 40s. They're all sort of in different phases. We have one who became a mother quite naturally, one who had a hard time becoming another one whose sexual orientation doesn't really allow for her to become pregnant naturally, and another one who doesn't really want kids. And it's interesting to get to see their thoughts and their perspective and how they look at the other women. And sometimes they're joined together by the fact that some of them are mothers and some of them aren't, but not always. Why was this something that you wanted to explore?
I love that question. Well, I actually just turned 40 a month before my book came out, which is like such funny timing because I wrote it 2 years ago. So I guess it was something I was really thinking about because I think at this age, I do have a lot of friends in different circumstances, and everyone's like gone down different paths and are happy with that path or want something more or different. And so I wouldn't say any of the characters are based on anyone I know or on myself, but I do think these conversations feel relevant and like conversations that are being had and dynamics that are being had in like the lives of people I know. So yeah, I thought it was an interesting age to write about because I think there's a lot said about age 30 that, people are going in different paths, but I think it continues through life. Like at every stage, there's people having drastically different experiences.
I think you're right. And I think you're right that we do often read about women in their 30s and we read about this like biological clock that's ticking. And if I don't have a kid now, I can't have it.
Right.
Once you've reached 40, the biological clock is either very loud or it's kind of gone.
Right.
And you don't talk about that, or we don't talk about that as much. And friendships, once the friends have kids who are older kids, how that can divide and separate as well. So I really enjoyed all of that.
Oh, thank you.
And sometimes from one perspective, one character thinking, okay, these two characters are really close because they have this thing in common. And then one of those two characters thinking that is actually not true because of the things that they have that are not in common. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
The nuances.
I think it's really something I think about a lot of how, on the surface, two people who have children or two people who don't, could be grouped together because they have that in common. But there's so many more layers on top of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you do a really nice job handling all of that as well.
Thank you.
There are also cultural differences between these women. So it's interesting to me that you haven't spent more time in France because particularly with Arabelle and her grandmother being French, and then Darcy, who comes from a French family, and then we have the other two women being American. Were there challenges that you found in crafting these cultural differences?
Yes. I keep adding more to the challenges of this. Yes. Maybe I keep saying this was the biggest one. No, maybe this was the biggest one for me. Because like I said, I don't speak French and I haven't spent so much time in France. And I knew I wanted to set it in Provence. But then I realized once I did that, like what an undertaking it was going to be because, I read so many books. I talked to so many French people. I feel so lucky to have such a good copy editing team who corrected a lot of my bad French that I tried to do. And I'm sure some mistakes still slip through because, they do. But I really tried my best to learn about culture. And I think it's such a fun thing. A fun part of being an author is because I like writing books about Americans abroad. That feels like my thing. I live abroad and I've traveled a lot. And for me, that feels like what I want to read. I love armchair traveling. And so it's like with each book, I'm exploring a new place that, yes, I've been to, but probably I don't know the language and I haven't spent so much time there. So it is like it's a hard thing, but it's also so fun for me because I get to learn all these things that, I wasn't exposed to before. So it's kind of like I'm taking a crash course in a country at the same time as writing a book. It always involves a lot of research, but anyway, it required a lot of research to do it.
Yeah. And so your research was, do you know French people? Were you able to have friends and things to speak to, or did you?
Yeah, I do. I was put in touch with a lot of people, and even I talked to friends who had studied abroad in France because I really wanted that to like have some of the flavor of that experience. And I spoke to a bunch of French people. So yes, I think that was indispensable. I don't think I could have done it without it.
There's an insight that you have in there where you say that Americans fear not being liked and the French fear being accused of a faute or a fault. I think that's just a really interesting perspective and an interesting difference between the two cultures to latch onto.
Yeah, I forgot where I learned that or if someone I interviewed said it, but I thought it was so interesting. And actually it helped me understand my French grandmother a little bit more,
Oh. Yeah, I think it's true. Americans want to be happy and everything's good and look at me, like me.
Yeah.
And the French don't want to make mistakes.
Yeah. I think, I'm sure you feel this too, but I don't know your background, but I know you live abroad and I live abroad. So I always think about how cultural differences are constantly in my face, because I live in Tel Aviv and I'm American and they're very different cultures. And so I do think about it when I'm writing a book. It's like, I really need to understand the culture if I'm going to write this, even if so much of what I learned doesn't make it in the book, which is normally true because I'm not writing, a textbook or anything, but I do feel like I have to really understand the nuances. Otherwise I'm not going to write it accurately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, so I think now might be a really nice time to hear something from the book. Would you mind reading for us?
Yeah, of course. I'll read from the beginning.
Perfect.
Chapter 1, Jade. In the prelude to sunrise, just after I returned to my room and drifted back off to sleep, I awakened to a scream. I bolt up in bed, shove my sleep mask off my face. I reach out to toggle the lamp, but where is the switch? Disorientation in the dead of night is doubled when you're across the world in someone else's home. Finally, I grasp the switch and wince as light illuminates the cavernous room, the herringbone marble fireplace, and towering windows framed in gauzy cream drapes, the leafy branches of an oak tree swishing against the exterior of the panes. In the thick silence that has ensued, I analyze the sound I thought I heard. Its scratchy, desperate contours. Did I dream it? I sagged back into my nest of pillows. I suppose I did. I grab my phone to see if one of the girls has texted. No text, and mercifully no Instagram notification from @I'mWatchingYou88. Only the time blinks back at me, 6:05. So I stole not even 10 minutes of sleep after returning from my little errand. My heart slaps my chest. Did someone see me? Does someone know? No, impossible. I force my mind to turn over other affairs. The fact that my birthday is officially over. 40, thank the Lord. 39 felt like a forced march. But now that I'm here in this new decade, I remind myself again that I have everything I've ever wanted. A kind, gorgeous husband, 2 amazing kids, a career that has steadily skyrocketed, and I'm hotter than ever, hotter even than most of the 24-year-olds who clamor to take my spin classes. 40 isn't our grandmother's 40, right? My unconvincing pep talk is interrupted by another scream. My breath stalls, hovers until I gulp for it. The sound roller coasters my eardrums. I've never heard anything so primal, and its origin is clear. Darcy. I hear footsteps outside my door. Arabelle? Belle? When there is no answer, I shout, I'm coming. The few words I manage sandpaper my throat. Darcy needs me, us, someone, but still I am fixed in place to this linen duvet. In the 20 years, Darcy de Margalas Belle has been my best friend. I've hardly ever heard her scream. Darcy is exceedingly patient and compassionate, not the type to overreact. Recently, though, I've witnessed her in a couple disproportionate blow-ups. An unusually short fuse with her kids, with Oliver. It's not nice of me to say, and I wouldn't aloud. These are the kindnesses best friends pay each other, to trip over each other's failings and then straighten out the rug. Silence has once again descended like a tarp on the chateau. I pad down from the bed and reach for my tea draped on the olive velvet chase, then tug it back on. My feet shiver against the terracotta tiles. For a moment, the view from my window transfixes me. The manicured grounds, the still swimming pool, the shimmering moon. It is a starry night like the one conceived by Vincent van Gogh, who painted his most acclaimed works at a sanatorium nearby. His muse was this very horizon that has shaped me in indelible ways. I think about what I vowed before coming here, what I still must do. Then my eyes catch on a shadowy figure on the outskirts of the pool wandering past the hedges. Rolf? The groundskeeper? But why would he be walking about before morning? I step closer to the window, but then he's gone, disappeared around the corner, back to his little cabin on the outskirts of the property, I presume. It is the lovely part of summer in Saint-Remy de Provence. June. I've never been here in summertime, but this isn't my first time at Seraphine's Grand Chateau. Darcy used to bring all of us to visit her grandmother during the semester we met when we studied abroad in Avignon, 15 miles away. This time of year, lavender fields swathe the countryside, providing endless backdrop fodder for all the tourists who flock. But summer aside, my teeth are now chattering like someone banging on a door knocker. My nerves are the obvious puppeteers.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So what's next for you? You mentioned that you have some other books that you're working on.
Yeah, so my next book, which is another mystery thriller, another murder mystery that's Locked Room, will be out actually May 21st of next year. And it's set in Italy on the Orient Express train.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow. Is it sent contemporarily?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know the title of it now?
Yeah, it's called The Main Character.
Okay, fabulous. So we can all look out for that.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Thank you.
Where can people find you if they want to keep up to date with you and what you're doing and your books and all of that?
So Instagram is probably the best place at Jaclyn Goldis, and my website, jaclyngoldis.com.
Perfect. All right. So I'll include links to both of those places so that people can find you really easily. Thank you so much, Jaclyn. This is such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really enjoyed chatting with you. This was so fun.
Thank you again to Jaclyn Goldis for such an interesting conversation. You can find Jaclyn on Instagram and Twitter at Jaclyn Goldis and on jaclyngoldis.com. Please join me next week when my guest will be author Tara Isabella Burton, and she'll be speaking about her nonfiction book, Self-Made, Curating Our Image from Da Vinci to the Kardashians. Check back to see if your questions have been answered and to hear a reading from her book. Thank you for listening to Storytime in Paris. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity, and you can find me on all socials at Jennyphoria. That's JennyPhoria. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to rate and review it wherever you listen to podcasts. This is the fastest and easiest way to help the podcast grow, which will help me attract more great authors to bring to you. Please also spread the word to all the people you know who also love to read. If you'd like to go even deeper, join our book club over on Patreon at patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio, where I invite authors who have been on the podcast to come speak with us about their books and delve even deeper into the secrets we couldn't spoil on the podcast. Thank you again, and happy reading! This episode of Storytime in Paris was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more on this show and shows like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com.